welcome to the Therapy Show Behind Closed Doors. Here I am with Bob Cooke, and my name is Kellie Barratt, and I'm new to this show. And it's with a heavy heart that I need to tell all the listeners that we've sadly lost Jacci. Jacci passed away in April, and after a long illness. And you were very close to Jacci, weren't you, Bob?
Yes, I'll carry on a bit, Kelly. Jackie passed away, I think, about a month ago, and I think quite a lot of the listeners or viewers via my YouTube channel have been part of the journey. I knew that for the last 4.5 years that she's been struggling with the stage 4 ovarian cancer. And she's had many of her own past podcasts talking about that journey. So certainly not confidential, and certainly one that Jackie would want me to talk about. And for those people who didn't know, and it might be a bit of shock to you, I understand that, and I'll say a little bit more. So as I said, when I asked her 4 years ago to host this particular podcast, and she picked the name Therapy Behind Closed Doors because one of her passions was to demystify what actually happens in the therapy room. And so we agreed to do it. And there's something like, I would think about 4 weeks after I agreed and did the first podcast, or even the second podcast, she had the concrete diagnosis of a stage 4 ovarian cancer, which is a shock to both of us. Of course, turned her life upside down. And so for the last 4 years, she has been with me publishing these podcasts, even though her journey has been progressing to where, sadly, the finality of ending it. However, she, bravely, we went to 4.5 years or 4 years before she passed away. And we talked a lot about off air, whether she wanted these podcasts to continue. And she said she really did want them to continue. And then the next question is, who do we find to actually host them? Because Jackie hosted them. And then we came up with you, Kelly, and for lots of reasons. One, because actually the number one reason is because you knew Jackie, of course. You were in the same training year, I think. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, we started together in 2012.
Yeah, at the Manchester Institute. And so you knew each other well. So that's the prime reason. And second, of course, you're very, and you can talk a bit about your own background in a minute, but you're very well, what's the word, suited, and you're a professional psychotherapist yourself to be able to talk about what happens behind closed doors. So not only, you're very knowledgeable, but it's a way of honoring the continuity of the podcast with somebody she knew well, as well. So that's how come we asked you, or I asked you, and you very kindly said yes. And I think it's probably a good time for you to tell people about who you are and your background and your psychotherapy journey, or however much you want to share. I mean, I know you're a professional psychotherapist and trained in transaction analysis psychotherapy at the Manchester Institute, but I don't know what you specialize in particularly, but I don't know how big a clinical load you've got, for example. So, and your thoughts about taking up the offer, for example. So over to you. So I'm sure people would like to know a little bit about you really.
Yeah, I'm glad that Jackie was able to hand over to me. But I feel like Jackie's leaving some rather big shoes for me to fill. So I'm hoping I can do her legacy some justice. But yeah, I trained with Jackie in 2012, and then I was in a supervision group with her after that. But I trained first in my degrees in psychology and counselling, and then I trained as a person-centered counsellor. And then from there, I got working with Greater Manchester Probation Service and domestic abuse services. And then I retrained. So then I
Right.
came into therapy, and then retrained in TA. So, and it was your workshop actually on shame.
Yeah,
That,
I remember.
yeah,
You were very youthful then. I remember you very
yeah,
well.
yeah. I think that was about 2010, and so the kids were like 1 and 3 or something like that, and
15 years ago.
yeah, yeah, and I just thought, this is what is this magic?
Mhm.
I think I remember following you into the kitchen and saying, I need to train in this, or no, I need this therapy in my life, something like that. Um, and then in with therapy, then with you, I
Mm.
then decided that, oh well, you gave me the nudge to retrain, and it was the best thing I've ever done, actually. I apart from having the kids and getting married, of course.
And of course, it was a 4-year path, and then you started to, if I've got this right, you rented a room at the institute, and for a long time you were having your clinical practice at the institute, and then you eventually got a room of your own in Didsbury, Manchester.
Yes. Yeah, so I was at MIP for 10 years with my own, and so I left domestic abuse work and um, oh yeah, it's hard to remember now. I left domestic. I think at the time I was training and I was working domestic abuse, and I was at that point of having too many clients, and so I gave up the domestic abuse work, and then as I started with 1 day, and then 2 days, and then 3 days, and now I work 4 days,
Mm.
and well, seeing clients 4 days. So I've got a full practice, see adults, and individuals, couples, and I run a therapy group on a Tuesday night as
So
well.
you're really experienced.
Yeah, well, yeah, I like to
You've been around,
been around a while. Yeah,
clinical hours.
there's always more to learn. Always more to learn. But yeah,
You're a bit more younger than me, dear, but that's absolutely true.
feel
That's
very old.
well, I'm 74 now, so that's what I said. That and yeah, I've just come back from a conference in Slovenia where I was teaching people how to run relational group process, and so I joined the IP community. So I think there's always things to learn. I agree
Hmm.
with you on that. But I know Jackie would be very honored to have you
Hmm.
stepping into her shoes if you wanted to put it that way. I mean, I personally look at it this way. Um, in fact, an old Sufi saying, that's wise people. I remember. I don't know who said it to me. Is a person is never really dead until the last person knew them passes away.
Hmm.
So I'm sure she's here
Hmm.
with us and would be very proud.
Yes, I hope so. I really hope so. Yeah. Yes. So here we are then, episode 201.
Oh,
Um,
can I just say one other thing?
yes, yes.
People listening who probably, listened to Jackie for the last 4 years, is she loved these podcasts.
She did. Yes.
Yeah, and talking to Carl, her son, and other people close to her, it's the last professional thing that she did. So
Mm.
we did the last um, podcast, which I think is on maximum and minimum amount of time people spend in psychotherapy or something like that. Anyway, um, on the Monday, because every Monday we went off and did podcast and published it for the Thursday. And then we were supposed to meet the following Monday, but she wasn't well enough. And then she died not long after that.
Mm.
And, people close to her, and I said, his son particularly said it was the very last professional thing she did because she loved it so much. So please, I want to say thank you to the people who stayed with us. She was very thrilled that you did. And um, she really, um, how can I explain this? Passing away for some ways was a relief for her
Mm.
and for the family.
Mm.
And she loved podcasts. I
Mm.
wanted to say that.
Yeah, and she really wanted it to carry on. She did tell me, she said, "Oh, you can run it however you like, you can change
Oh,
it."
right. Okay.
But I thought, actually,
And get rid of me.
it works very well. Why would we change it? But I would like to kind of honor her and Carl, her son. Actually, he's been so helpful in enabling the podcast to continue. Because I'm not very tech savvy. That won't be news to other people. But so learning how to do this is it's a big step.
What you'll get now,
Mm.
which I like, what I'm going to say now, is people will say to you, "Oh, you host the podcast Therapy Behind Closed Doors." So your reputation, dear, will go before you. So when I go to Slovenia and various places and teach whatever it is, one of the things people always pop up and say, "Oh, I've been listening to your podcasts." So it's got a wide reach, these podcasts,
Gosh,
and a
people were saying that
wide
Slovenia.
audience. Yeah, so if you go into Spotify or whatever and you look up how many people have actually listened to these podcasts in 4.5 years, you're going to find it's about 300, 400,000.
Gosh, no, I had no idea. I had no idea of those numbers.
So there's a solid following every week
Mm.
of 400, 500 people. And there's many people going to different podcasts because we've done so many.
Mm.
So you will become known in that area. Just thought I'd prepare you for that process.
No pressure, Bob. No pressure.
None whatsoever. So that's it, really. Welcome you to. I mean, you're the host, but I mean, I'm honoured to have you here. So
Thank you,
thank you.
Bob. And thank you for you and Jackie asking me. That is an honour. And
Wonderful legacy for her, eh?
it
That's what
is,
people
yeah,
say to me.
yeah.
Who have emailed me in and
Mm.
kind words people have said,
Mm.
and some have been shocked, some have knew already, but they mostly every one of them say what a wonderful legacy that
Mm. Mm.
in this sense that Jackie's left behind.
And she was a real natural at this.
Yeah, she was
She
very
really.
natural at this, yes. So
Mm.
you've got, and you'll find your own style there. So I thought we could sort of move on. Oh, the other thing, and the logistics. Every podcast is half an hour.
Yes, and
Got a clock.
yes, well, I realised that I didn't check the clock before, so I think
Yeah,
we
that's what I thought I'd tell you. So we've done about 10 minutes chatting, haven't we?
have we? Yeah, I'm going to guess it around about that. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm going to let you, because you're going to host all this, to just shut me up. Because one of the things Jackie always used to say to me, Bob, you can meander on forever. So it used to close me down. And I never got frustrated, really, because I know that my wife talks to me forever about, oh, you can meander on forever. I don't know how Jackie managed to structure you into half an hour. So that's your job now.
Corral you and to keep
Just
you
to
on
close me
track.
down for about half an hour. About
Okay.
half an hour. I mean, obviously 32, 33, 29, whatever you like. But it's so podcasts that we've done are around the 30-minute mark.
Okay. Great.
So
Right.
I thought, so you, oh, sorry,
No,
this is what we did about meandering. Over to you now, then.
well, your idea of moving on to talking of how to work with grief in the therapy room
Yeah.
is really apt, I think. So I think that's a good place to start after we've lost Jackie. So, and I realised that when you've said this title, my brain's gone into lots of different areas, thinking about different kinds of grief and what and all of that means. So,
Okay.
what were you thinking?
Okay. So, as most people listen or even watch these videos on my YouTube channel will know, or perhaps they don't, is that I do all the mental health assessments at the Institute.
Yes.
So, today, 4 hours ago, somebody came in. What happens is I assess somebody for whatever it is they want, and then I pass them on to the numerous therapists we've got. So this person came in and said she wanted to work with bereavement issues.
Yeah.
And her dad had died. Sorry, my apologies. It's a man. His dad had died, I think it was 8 or 9 years ago, and he thought he'd got over it, but some triggers have occurred because things are happening in his private life, which means that he's, how can I explain it, dipped into more bereavement.
Hmm.
So he wanted to come back to talk about his father and to deal with the obvious emotions that have been coming up, which and some of them led to depression, to be able to move on. And so I passed the person to somebody else I know who works with bereavement and many other things, by the way. And I think that in my career, I would, I don't know how many people deal with grief like that. They come in and say, have a contract, they specifically work on bereavement and they want to work on bereavement with the father in this case, and it's very specific and work through it.
Mm,
That's one aspect of it. And then you get people who come in with many different and variations of loss.
mm,
So, for example, we've got two wonderful dogs who
mm.
are going to die, and you know them.
I know them very well,
Yeah,
yes.
and they'll pass away soon, and then there's a whole bereavement. And I don't know if Steph will go back into therapy with it because she's so attached with those dogs. Um, so, you know, in therapy, it doesn't have to be, loss of people. It could be loss of animals. It could be loss of situations. It could be loss of areas of life. For example, I went and lived in Gambia for 10 years, and I remember in my own therapy having some therapy sessions about the loss of losing the house in Gambia myself. So, but let's hear what you were just going to say about your mind went into
But
wherever it went.
yes, it did. So I at first I assumed you meant around grief around death. And then I started thinking about all the different types of death and the people to die, who might die, and how that might change for trainees or counselors, and how that, for example, I was thinking if somebody was to die by suicide, or there was to be a death of disaster like the Manchester bomb, or you know, I've been thinking a lot about dementia recently. My father-in-law's got dementia, and how that the loss of the person,
Yeah.
even though they've not died. So, and then I started thinking about loss generally and endings, and that how we can move into a grief process about any kind of ending, not
Hmm,
just necessarily death.
precisely.
Yeah, and I don't think people always think about it in those terms, that about loss or endings.
No, I had somebody else who was talking about leaving. Actually, in this case, it was a supervisor, and she'd run a supervision group for a long time, and she was talking about the supervision group ending, and that's a loss, and a
Yes.
loss to her
Yeah.
life.
Mm. Yeah.
So, and lots of situations, like I've just said, and there's many areas of loss, isn't there?
Yeah. And kind of every time we choose something, we there's a loss in the thing that we lose. So for example, when I left MIP and started my own
Oh,
training, no, my own therapy room, even though that's an exciting thing for me to do, there was still grief around leaving MIP as a training. As
mm.
that's where I started my training, my therapy career rather. Well, I started my training and then my therapy. So there's lots of different kinds of loss.
Yeah, there is, and yes, there is, and I was just thinking about when that's so many years ago, I did my own trainings, but the first one of the modules was about grief, and the trainer said, "I'm going to teach you the grief cycle,"
Mm.
which was and I can't remember her name.
The
Very
Elizabeth
well,
Kubler-Ross, or
yeah,
the yeah,
Kubler-Ross,
yeah, yeah,
and the different stages of grief, and
yes.
and she talks about 2 years. Just so yeah, she talked about loss, like of significant others, not
Mm,
you know, and she had a whole grief cycle, and people often, if they go through it healthily, she said 2 years, but
mm,
sometimes people get stuck
yeah.
at different stages in the grief
Mm,
cycle. So the first stage, for example, is disbelief.
mhm,
Um, and and then I can't remember them all. There's four or five of them.
yeah,
Uh, Angers, I think, the
yeah.
first stage, um, and then we move to integration. But I remember that, and I always remember thinking, "Oh, that makes sense of these stupid people, these reporters on television, and there's somebody who's just seen their mother and father blown up or whatever it is. They're in some sort of zone, like Ukraine or whatever, and they say to the person, 'What do you feel?'
Mm,
I mean, how can somebody answer that? at that particular moment.
Mm.
So because they're completely traumatized and in disbelief.
Mm.
And so I remember being taught that. I don't know if I totally agree about 2 years, by the way, but I certainly think the stages.
Yeah, and they're not linear, are they?
No.
People can move in and out of the different stages. I think the other stages are anger, bargaining. No, is it? Yeah, anger, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
Yeah,
Something like
integration
that.
acceptance is
Yeah.
the last.
I thought I'd heard that there was another two stages added, that the five stages had become.
Might well be. The thing that I always sort of reflected on is when theorists, therapists, researchers put time frames,
Mm. Yeah.
because I think people have their own time frames and it's not always 2 years.
Mm.
But what is correct is people can get stuck for a very long time on, say, the disbelief stage. Let's pick one stage,
Yeah.
the disbelief stage, for example, and or the anger, or the denial stage, or whichever they are, and they get stuck on that, and then they end up in uh, this sort of incapacitated stage or lack of functioning, or however you want to talk about it. So they need to have therapy, or they need sort of help to work through the different stages.
Mm. So how can we do that as therapists, Bob? What's the best way that we can help them?
Well, the first step, like I was very interested when this person came in and talked about he'd had some therapy sort of 8 years ago, and he thought he'd. I can't talk about the trigger too much because of confidentiality, but we're now talking 8 years later, and let's say some things had happened in his family situation which triggered him back
Mm.
to a certain stage, which actually he was clearly got stuck in, which
Mm.
is incapacitation in this stage, and depression, by the way.
Yeah.
So he has. So for me personally, I've referred him on, but I would think that the therapist would listen to the story,
Mm.
um, and take him back to that stage, which whatever it is, denial or lack
Mm.
of acceptance or anger, and how working through the repressed feelings. Say it's anger which is being
Yeah.
repressed,
Hmm.
working through the repressed feelings. If it was denial, doing some reality testing. So
Mm.
helping the person work through specific stages. If it's somebody who's come in specific for bereavement, whether it's loss or whatever it is, first step is to listen to the person's story
Yeah. Yeah.
rather than assume something.
Mm. So we make sure that we're in the client's frame of reference and not in ours.
Yeah, because everybody has their own unique experience.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I think therapists can move it into a place of often assuming
Mm.
something. And often assuming, oh, this person's got to work through these stages, those stages, this stages, and go into some sort of technique formation to help the person walk through stages, which actually they may not be at all. They might be somewhere else. So I'm glad you started off saying these stages weren't linear.
Mm. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know what the training is like now, but I don't remember I don't think we had any specific grief training. It was like that's more of something that we have to have as therapists as extra. We have to
Correct.
go and have extra training for it.
You're right. So we didn't, so you're
Mm.
correct. As we don't have, for example, training in eating disorders, or
Yeah.
we don't have training XX and X, people go and specialize in those things after the
Mhm.
training. But I do remember you might have, in some of the modules, we might have been given a reference to certain things, so especially Kubler-Ross's
Mm.
book around that process. But you are correct. There isn't a specific training and specialism because there's so much things to cover in the standard psychotherapy training
Yeah.
program. You couldn't include everything.
Mm.
So that's right. So usually on the journey to become psychotherapists, especially when people start working clinically, they might go off and have specialized CPD, that's continuing professional development, in particular areas, and grief one of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you do that?
Well, yeah, I'm trying to think if what, in the back catalogue of my CPD. I can't quite remember if I have or not, but it's making me think I need to go and have a look and check. But
Hmm.
What I do know working with grief is that it can take a very long time, and that clients can be in those stages for a very long time, and needing and holding that space.
Mm.
And what they often say is that there's nobody else to talk to about it, because the people in their lives they're kind of, well, I don't want to say they're bored of talking about it, or they want them to be okay. And so they don't feel that they can talk about it in their outside lives to family and friends as much.
You're right. Another aspect I'd like to talk about grief, which comes up quite a lot. And this happened 3 weeks ago. Somebody came in and they said, my mother died 6 days ago.
Wow.
Now, you would no longer take that person on then than fly,
Yeah.
because different therapists might have different thought processes around
Mm.
this in terms of how long you might ask people, because it's near they're in the disbelief situation, disbelief traumatic stage, so they need to be able to have some adult processing of this before they come and have the bereavement stuff. And
Mm.
um, different therapists, I think, have different thoughts on how long it is before they will take somebody on to process the bereavement. I know if you look at I was thinking of a particular school that I know who, I was thinking of somebody very close. She's only quite young, and her mother died, and the school's policy was 6 months
Okay.
before they would give any counselling to her.
Mm.
So she could integrate and process, and in TA terms, have some sense of
Mm.
adult reflection. Now, is that too long? Then I know another school would says 3 months. I certainly individually, and I'd like to say to all listeners listening to this, you might have your own policy on how long you would advocate to a client, before they come back and process the loss of the significant other person. So I can say it will differ, but there has to be I believe, a significant time for the person to actually reflect from their adult. And personally, for me, it would be 3 months.
Yeah, I have never thought about that before, because it's never come up. It makes sense though. I imagine that it takes so much time to process and get through the administration of
And
it,
the
just
logistics,
practicality.
this,
Yeah.
the disbelief, the
Mm.
trauma.
Mm.
I think 3 months minimum.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised the school said 6 months.
Mm. Well, it's such a lot, isn't it? Death is it's so all encompassing. We don't really talk about it much in society. So it's a lot to filter through. So 3 months sounds like a good amount of time to me.
Yeah, and um, I'm a bit annoyed because the school hasn't come back after 6 months and monitored it and followed it up. But we're here talking about time, aren't we? So,
Mm.
for therapists listening, or budding therapists or counselors, if somebody comes to you and says, "Look, my mother and father died last week," don't take them on.
Mm.
Say, "Look, go back and have some time to process, integrate this, do the logistics, the administration. Maybe you're the executor of the will. You've got to
Mm.
sort out the burials and everything that goes with that." And it'll be too overwhelming for you to start processing your own loss when you've got to have some adult function to do all this.
Mm. Yes, and that's the enough adults, isn't it? That's vital.
Mm.
Well, certainly that's how we term it in TA.
Yeah.
Mm.
So the other thing that's that, and the other thing which you touched on, and I'm going to touch on again, when you're doing therapy with people, you might, as you go down the onion layers, come across some loss which has not been talked about, or
Mm.
suddenly pops out, or I didn't know the grandfather died in X or
Mm.
B, and then you say, well, have you processed this and whatever, and they
Mm.
say no.
Mm.
And then you say, well, is there anything you need to do? And then they start getting really upset. So
Mm.
you never know in therapy. I like to know your experience on this, but we're talking about grief here,
Mm.
whatever it is, by the way. We never we, Sometimes we can't plan for what comes up.
Yes, I absolutely agree. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
think you're working
We
on
go
one
with what
thing.
does plan. We do go with what does come up. However, in many situations, it's impossible to plan.
Mm. Yeah. Well, if the client isn't aware of it and hasn't thought it was an issue, and then suddenly we kind of, yeah, like on the onion layers, I love that analogy, and then we find it, so then yeah, you've got sort of a brand new issue in the therapy room.
Mm, mm. And the other thing about grief is, in my experience, it's a, I like to talk about the concept of regression
Oh.
because when people grieve, they usually regress to a younger age.
Mm, mm.
Is that your experience?
Yes, yes. Yeah, I had an experience a couple of weeks ago actually that it was quite stark, um, of how young the client went and how quickly. It's like a trapdoor, and she dropped into a child ego state very, very quickly. And but yes, that's. I mean, we're used to working with the regression generally, but in grief, yeah, it was really quick.
Yeah, so that means from transaction analysis terms, I mean, this might be completely obvious to people listening, and certainly to you, Kelly. We need to utilize our nurturing parent channel
Mm,
and provide a containment and protection for when we're working with loss.
mm. Yes, yes.
This
That
isn't
makes.
the time for using controlling or critical parents. Say, "Oh, you should be grieving this way. Come on. You've done this, you've done that. You know, you're bigger than this. Surely you can move on or something or other." That has to be all completely out of the window.
Mm. Yeah.
Nurturing child going at the pace and the rhythm and attuning to where the person is and their unique experience of what all these stages of grief are about. Whatever it is, whether it be loss of a pet. I was
Mm.
just thinking of another client who so attached to a dog, and every morning for 18 years, and the dog in those 18 years, the dog was not only a provider of soul support, but became their companion. And
Mm.
they're really, for this particular person, their reason for living in many ways.
Mm.
So it was such a big thing. And then from that, of course, if you think about this, if this, and I remember very much the work, this dog was the purpose for person living for lots of reasons, which I'm not going to do in this podcast. Um, then she felt like killing herself.
Gosh.
She had no purpose
Mm.
from
Yeah.
her perspective.
Yes. Yeah.
Then she went into depression.
Yeah.
This is why we talk about stages
Mm.
of depression, acceptance.
Mm.
And um, we need to use our skills as psychotherapists to deal with the depression that might come up,
Mm.
the anger, all those stages that we talk about as we follow the person through their grief process. We need to be able to facilitate the repression of the emotions, the reality testing, and all these things, and help them develop and empower themselves and integrate back so they can move on,
And function well.
function healthily, and because unless that happens, the mourning, the grief, the repressed emotions, people develop coping mechanisms like they might go to alcohol, they might go to addictions,
Mm.
and they cope in a certain way, but it isn't healthy.
Yeah, and it doesn't deal with the loss.
Mm.
Mm.
That's the bit. Doesn't deal with the loss. The loss gets, or the emotions around the loss get put into a compartment,
Mm.
and the door gets shut.
Mm.
I mean, I know how long you've been working as a psychotherapist, so you must have numerous times worked with loss in many different ways.
Yes, yeah, and that's what kind of I've learned that over the years about how it's not so, and loss is what's the word I'm looking for? God, I'm perimenopausal, and sometimes the words just get wiped out of my brain.
Yeah,
But yes, loss generally, I'd say there's loss in most in all of the work somewhere, some kind of loss.
yeah, that's right. So somebody comes in for many different things. What might pop up? is loss of purpose in life, loss
Yeah.
of a job,
Mm,
loss of what they used to be like,
mm,
loss of a partner, loss of a significant other, loss of animals, loss of a house, loss of how it used to be, loss of, I mean, I could go on and on.
mm.
Loss of identity is a very big one. How
Yes.
things
Yes.
used to be before my father got bankrupt, actually. So whatever it is. Uh, and I think as therapists, we we have to. I do actually. I think CPTC, continuing professional development training on this specific subject, is probably a good one to look at. But we have to be able to work through, help clients work through their repressed emotions,
Mm. And
which
it's
is quite.
interesting, actually, you're saying loss there. Is that what I work with a lot is new mums and the loss of
Oh,
their identity. And I don't think that gets talked about very much, actually, how hard it is becoming a new mum. And because we lose our work usually, and then the structure of our lives. So, um, yeah, but that's it, it's lost in a different way because it's the joy of having a new baby, but the loss of the life that we had.
oh, I think it's a really big.
Mm,
I mean, I'm a father.
mm.
Please don't leave fathers. I want to part me wants. Please don't leave fathers out of this, by the way, because I was just thinking when Jessica came along, my daughter, I I I took a long time off to be a sort of I don't know how long now, but to help Steph, and I was a very hands-on father. Um, but I didn't, you're quite right. I didn't lose my identity as a psychotherapist and everything goes from that. So perhaps there's a lot of difference in this, but I think it's a big area that you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, of course, there's people, I suppose it's another thing altogether. Yeah, but I was thinking of don't want the babies. So, but that's a whole different area. But
Mm,
you work a lot in that area, do you? With a lot of
yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah. I guess that's just, my a lot of my client base are kind of, that age. Yeah, so with of new babies. But Bob, I'm just looking at the time. I've gone over. I've been terrible at the timekeeping.
For your first session, you will eventually learn what Jackie did was
I'm rubbish.
you see that no, no, no. It's all right going over a few minutes, but she had a way of closing it down.
Yes.
That's it's nice that you just say it like that, by the way. But she didn't, I think, had any hard time on herself as she went to 35 minutes or
Yeah,
something.
yeah. I
Um,
realise I need to be I'm multitasking, which of course I'm doing all the time in the therapy room. But it's quite interesting. It's a bit different here on
yeah,
screen.
you'll get used to it.
Yeah, I will, I'm
It's
sure.
just a learned experience, but I've enjoyed talking about the subject, and I could have talked a lot more about the passing of Jackie, but I
Yes.
hope it hasn't been too much of a shock for people perhaps
Mm.
coming in. But I do want to say welcome to you, Kelly, and I've liked our first session.
Me too, Bob. Thank you very much for inviting me. And so next session, our next podcast rather, number that will be 202, will be the use of positive strokes in the therapy room.
Yeah, so that's from the word strokes comes from transaction analysis. It's a unit of social recognition,
Mm.
either positive or negative. We'll talk a lot about next podcast, but it's a very interesting topic. And of course, I know been thinking of these recent titles, and Jackie always goes on about I'm one that does the titles, but I do think it's important to talk about in terms of, well, especially around the facilitation of the child ego state.
Mm.
So what we used to do, you, I know Kelly and you have been talking about this. Um, we'll probably actually do them on a Thursday and set them up to be publicized again. Maybe the same time, come into your inbox at 6 o'clock on a Thursday. And we'll work it out between us two of us. But thank you very much. I've enjoyed you being here, and I'm looking forward to our collaboration together. Kellie Barratt.
Me too, Bob Cooke. Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
You've been listening to The Therapy Show, Behind Closed Doors podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. We'll be back next week with another episode.